When it comes to hunting optics, I've had a fair bit of experience with low power variables. I've owned a few over the years. So today we're going to talk about low power variables, which ones I found were the best, and some other considerations to help you pick a good scope. So I initially thought that low power variables were going to be the answer to all of my hunting woes of hunting in thick bush where you need to have a wide field of view, but then also being able to zoom in if you do need to take a longer shot. So I went down the rabbit hole of low power variables and I've owned quite a few. So let's just jump into the ones I have had a look at and give you sort of my views on each one. So the first low power variable I looked at when I wanted to get into them was the Vortex Crossfire II 1:4 by 24 second focal plane. Things I found with it were it had very poor illumination. The illumination is just a small dot in the center. It doesn't have a defined cross, and with the illumination on, I just found that I couldn't really pinpoint where I was looking with it. The placement of the illumination control itself is on top of the scope, which is kind of in a very bad spot, because if you're trying to look over the top of your optic to try and find the animal in the bush before you bring the rifle up, it can impede your field of view. And the weight, for a 1:4, it's kind of heavy. It comes in at 450 grams, which is kind of ridiculous for what it provides you being a 1:4. I then moved away from that and I went to an Athlon Talos BTR 1:4 by 24 second focal plane. There are a lot of issues with that, and I did a whole separate review just on that scope itself. These issues were not just with this particular scope, it was across a couple of different Athlons. A mate of mine had an Athlon, I think it was a 3-15 from memory, it was something like that, but all of the issues that I was having with this scope actually came on that scope as well, so it just happened to be that we both had Athlons at the same time. So the turrets on top are not capped, and the turrets don't lock, and I found that they actually moved on me a fair few times moving around the bush, whether I'd hit it with my bino rig or whether I'd hit it on a branch or a tree or whatever. I just found that it wouldn't stay on the zero position very well. They were also very spongy turrets and not a really defined click. I just didn't like the turrets at all. The zoom ring and the diopter ring were both extremely stiff, to the point where going from 1x to 4x, you would need to take the rifle out of your shoulder and really, fully crank down on it to get it to turn. I'm not too worried about the diopter ring being stiff, because you kind of want that to lock into where it is and not really move, but the zoom, you kind of want to be able to move that freely. Even with a throw lever, it was extremely hard to move. The reticle is extremely busy, has a lot of markers in it that you don't really need for a 1:4. Now, with this scope, so one, you've got unlocked exposed turrets for dialing, and you also have all these hash marks for holdovers, but you're only at 4x. You don't really need to be holding off and doing lots of stuff on a 4x scope. I think that's just a little bit ridiculous. It has illumination, but it illuminated too much of the reticle. I would have preferred if it had just illuminated just the cross in the center and left everything else black. It would have drawn your eye easier to the center, but because everything is illuminated, to me, defeats the purpose of the illumination, because now your eye is not immediately drawn to the center of the sight. This is extremely heavy. This is the heaviest one by far at 510 grams. That is absolutely ridiculous for a 1:4. You may as well put on a 3-15 if you're going to put something that's 500 grams on. So I used that for probably nearly a year, and then I moved it on and I got a Vortex Strike Eagle 1:8 by 24 second focal plane. It has a very busy reticle that doesn't really align with the ammunition I was using, so I found it to be quite redundant. For what it's designed for, it's really good. It's designed for an AR, so it has a segmented circle with a dot in the middle, designed for your up-close shooting, and then it has a BDC that goes down, I believe, at 600 meters. But that's only really for 55 grain 5.56 or 150 grain 7.62. It doesn't really line up with what I was using, and I was using 165 grain Aussie Outback 308 stuff at the time with that one. It lined up close enough, but not the best. So I wouldn't really rely on it to be able to get a shot onto an animal. It has like a ranging reticle in there, but that's designed for an IPSC target, which is a human torso and head. And obviously if you're ranging deer, that doesn't really help you at all. So I just found that everything in that sight was too busy and just a little bit redundant for what I needed. The zoom ring was really stiff. You needed to use the throw lever, but then if you used the throw lever, it got in the way of using the bolt on a bolt action. And that's just purely because this scope is not designed to go on a bolt action, it's designed to go on a semi-automatic. It's just not really the right scope for what I was trying to use it for. It says that it's daylight bright, but it really isn't. I found that it goes up to 11, but I found that it wasn't really super bright in the daytime. It was excellent for, you know, dawn dusk hunting, but yeah, in the middle of the day, it was kind of pointless. I had a lot of issues with focus. One power, if you got the focus right, so it didn't distort your image and it looked like a normal 1x scope. When you did zoom into 8, it would be completely out of focus. But if you focused it for ×8 when you zoomed back to 1x, everything would be a little bit distorted as well, and it didn't look quite right. So I was constantly playing with the diopter ring, which is a pain in the ass, and I really didn't like having to do that. And once again, this is a fairly heavy scope. This comes in at 500 grams, or 499 on the one I weighed. For what I was using it for, it was just too heavy because I wasn't really using the 1x function on it because I couldn't really get it to focus properly. So I was mainly rolling it from 3. So I was essentially using it as a 3 to 8. And to put that in perspective, I could use a Leupold 3 to 9 for nearly half the weight of that. So I ended up removing that scope. I then got a good deal secondhand on a Leupold VXR Patrol 1.25 to 4 by 20 second focal plane, and then I used this for a little bit as well. So the turrets on this are not capped and they're not locking turrets. However, it does have very nice clicks, and I never once bumped it off 0. So that just goes to show that a good quality exposed turret is worth it over like the cheap Athlon one where I kept on bumping it off 0. This one never bumped off 0 in the same sort of conditions. The illumination is what they call a fire dot, which is a really, really small dot in the center of the graticle. It's very dull, and I found that even on the higher setting, I could never see it during the daytime, so I found it a little bit pointless to have. Low light hunting, it may have been better, but I don't believe that a low power variable is very good for low light hunting because you're getting a lot less light in through your objective lens than if you used a traditional style scope. A 40mm objective and up, you're letting more light in, which means you can then see better through your scope. One good thing it does have though is it has long eye relief, so this would be an excellent scope to put onto a dangerous game rifle because you don't run the risk of smacking yourself in the face. Well, out of all this list of scopes that we've gone through so far, this one has the longest eye relief of up to, I think it's nearly 4 inches or just on 4 inches. That is pretty good, so yeah, it would be very good on a dangerous game rifle. The weight, it comes in at 340 grams, so it's actually not too bad. It's kind of in that good area of where you kind of want your scope to be weighed at. Now I did have this on my 358 Winchester for about, let's say 6 to 8 months. I can't remember the exact time I've had that on there. Have shot a deer with it, worked well, but I found that ×4 was kind of tapping me out for shots that I could have taken where I didn't have enough zoom. So on that particular rifle, I've since swapped that out for a Leupold VX1 3 to 9 by 40, and we'll see how that goes now. So that Leupold VXR will probably end up going onto my 9.3 by 62 or another dangerous game rifle in the future, but I will be holding on to that. All of the others so far I've ended up selling. And the last low power variable that I bought was a Leupold VX1 1 to 4 by 20 second focal plane. It's actually a shotgun sight, and it does live on my rifled shotgun barrel from my Adler B220. Now, I love this scope. It's simple. It doesn't have any illumination, doesn't have anything crazy. It's just a duplex reticle. It has long eye relief. I think it's 3.8 inches to 4.25 inches or something in that range. So it is extremely long. It works well on that rifled barrel because of how far forward the cantilever mount is. You need a long eye relief scope on that. It is true 1 power, and the 4 power is quite nice, and it's extremely light. It comes in at 230 grams, which is by far the lightest low power variable that I have been able to find and test. So that will spend the rest of its life living on that rifled barrel. It works extremely well, particularly when I'm firing my 50 cal Sabo rounds out of the shotgun. So there you have it. There's 5 different low power variables that I've personally owned and tested. 2 of those I've done proper in-depth review videos on, being the Athlon and the Vortex Strike Eagle. Now, when it comes to using a low power variable, is it the golden bullet you need for hunting? After using them for probably 3 years, I would say that I don't think they are. I think what they give you is good. However, I found that I never actually used them on the lowest setting, apart from the one that's on the shotgun, because you kind of have to for how close it is. But I usually found that I was sticking to 2 power or 3 power on the low end. So then if you're using a 1 to 4, I'm really only using the 2 to 4 function, which kind of negates the purpose, and you'd get more out of using a 2 to 7, a 3 to 9, or a 2 to 10. You would get more out of it than using, you know, a 1 to 4, a 1 to 6, or a 1 to 8. So that's my 2 cents on low power variables. I hope you got something out of that. If you want to support the channel, hit Patreon, link in the description below. As always, I'll see you next video, and hooroo.